So here we are, a small holiday edition of our check-ins. But we're you know we've just hit record so that those of us who are not able to join today can hear what we're talking about. You've missed our health check-ins, so we'll spare you of that. But yes, we are aware of several people who couldn't make it today, including Madresh, who is traveling in India. And Joy, you were going to start us off with some of the updates,
Um, I was.
or at
I
least
was
that one
basically
about Madresh. You were going to talk
about
about.
Maduresh. I was basically wanting to let you know that he had volunteered to help out. I mean, um, I think you know, he has been involved with WSF Discuss and then WSM Discuss right from the beginning. And he is intimately familiar with how it works. Um, and So he helped in small ways in the transfer of the responsibility, the hosting responsibility from Kasim to Encuentro Cinco that Suren coordinates in Boston last year and the year before. So again, he's been more peripherally involved, but he anyway volunteered to help out. And he was helping out a bit on the side, and then we just felt that it was time that he was doing more and more, that it made sense to have another person in the group, which that was a plan anyway. So anyway, he's formally joined. It in one sense just means there's a small signal group where we communicate with each other in terms of catching up, prompting, and so on and so forth. If nothing more than that at this point, it has no greater life, the coordination. But in principle, the idea was that we would separately meet, the four of us, to talk about, making things more steady. But that's been less possible. Minor incursions and excursions in different parts of the world have been getting in the way. Um, so, um, so
I think
that's
it's noteworthy because I think it is part of what 2023 was about. I mean, we started 2023, Surin and Joy and I think, with some hopes that we would be able to do more than we were able to do. And that's to be really frank about it. And health things came up, um, logistical, political things came up for me. But the other thing on the more positive note that came up was Madaresh's willingness and ability to step forward. And so I think by closing out this year with having him, join what we've called the core group, more than just simply dealing with some of the technical things which have been done already, but also dealing with some of the political things, to me gives me some hope um, that in the year ahead we can do more of what we say we're going to do, even given our limited capacity and resources, but our rich networks and rich engagements. So that's one piece of what I think, for me, ending 2023 on a positive, hopeful note and looking to some of the differences. Let me say one other thing, or maybe more than one, but I noted quickly in the core group, in our little signal group, that I had some news because I have been in very regular touch with two of our colleagues, some touch with others. I've been in limited touch with Patrick and Wendy, though I did get to see Wendy in person in the last month, which was lovely, and she's basically fine. But I've been in regular touch with Marcella and Michal, and so there are a couple of things worth noting here by way of updates, and then maybe the three of us can talk about our own personal work and updates for a bit, and that could be our meeting today. But um, I was with Marcella for almost a week in Granada, Spain, where there was a major international peace research conference, which, in addition to having, of course, the whole Spanish and State of Spain movement, as well as people from Basque Country and Catalonia, but also quite a number of other Europeans and a significant group of Latin Americans from Colombia, where Marcela is from, but also from Mexico, Ecuador, a few other places. And so it was a robust conference where there were more conversations about rebuilding the European peace studies and peace movements, um, but also in particular regarding our group. Marcela's been, I think, back and forth about how much time she could give, but I think it's worth noting that on the table for 2024 is for Marcela, Madaresh, myself, and Stellan Windhagen of Sweden to meet, uh, because Marcela is being brought into and coming into the resistance studies circles that Madaresh and Stellan and I are part of. And I think we're thinking of one piece of that work having some space here in this WSM Discuss and Movements of Movements, because um, Madaresh and I, in particular, have been thinking about and talking about and not working on and not moving forward this concept of the professors of the street, this sort of refiguring of who the real experts are on peace and justice issues. And we have all of these peace studies professors and all these institutes and think tanks and whatnot. But the real professors of the street hold the most significant knowledge for. So this is not a brand new idea, but it's a sort of reformulation that
Mm.
Resistance Studies Initiative and Resistance Studies Network wanted to pursue. So this is something that appeals to Madaresh and Marcela and myself. And as Marcela comes on to be part of the Resistance Studies Initiative, we began conversations about how this could be something that Madaresh, Marcela, and I could enact in some ways by populating conversations in this group and on the listserv. So that's a little hopeful thing. Um, Not yet concretized, but something planned in terms of conversation at least, and hopefully concretized in the year to come. It's noteworthy also that Marcela, has recently taken up the helm as co-coordinator of the Latin American Peace Research Association. So she's got the whole continental coordination to do along with her own work in Colombia at external universities. So she's got her plate full like the rest of us. But I think that this whole idea of professors of the street and work with Madaresh and myself, with support from Stellan, might be a boost to our work here in 2024. Now my Michal update. I just heard from her yesterday that she actually had some health stuff in the last week as well, but she seems to be better and stuff with her daughter, of course. But the really exciting news, I think, we're both excited about it, so we'll share it with you folks. Um, Joy knows that I think it's been 50 or 60 years that Michal and I co-wrote a piece that has been almost ready to go. No, maybe it's only been 2 years, but it feels like all our lives we've been almost ready to produce this piece called Beyond Eurocentrism. It's a piece that was originally inspired by some threads on WSM Discuss Listserv, but it's very much, of course, grown since then. And we both are now officially done with it. We're both happy with it. We both think it's ready to be published. And so we're actually in process right this minute of conversation with the publisher Common Notions, which does a lot of nice things, including small booklets here in the U.S., but also nice connections with movements in the global South. And so we're talking with them now. Just had a couple of meetings in the last week about them publishing a small booklet or a short book of that essay and a couple of others. Of course, our desire, Michal and I, is once that gets finalized, which hopefully will happen in the next weeks, we'll have at least a piece of that that will be available for free online um, on the listserv. So I think that's finally going to come out. Again, I don't expect anything this year, but that's an early 2024 thing where we'll have some previewed um, excerpt or piece of the essay, I think, available quickly, and then the book will be out later in the year. But I know that at least monitoring that, despite all of her busyness and work and parenthood, Michal is really interested in coming back. She said she might try to hop on this call today, but at least she's still paying attention, and this publication of our work finally, and possibly and likely in book form by the sometime at the later in 2024 will bring her back a little bit to some conversations in the listserv at least. So those are my reports for people who are absent: Madaresh, Marcella, and Michal. Do we have any other reports for people who are not here, whether or not their names begin with M?
I've already reported about Suren, I think. I don't know whether it's on record or not, but basically he's struggling with his health and with his with trying to make ends meet. I understand, and not to make it too pithy. So I heard from him yesterday. I should mention I got a very brief message on Signal saying he hasn't had the bandwidth to be able to handle everything, and that's it.
We were happy to hear from him because it sounded like it was more a bandwidth issue than a health crisis issue. So
yes, no, and I spoke with his colleague who confirmed this, that he's okay, and that's great. That's a great relief.
That's the most important news. Maybe I'll say this, assuming that he's probably the most likely person to listen to this video. We have this dear comrade here in New York, an elder Black Panther, Sekou Odinga, who obviously has an extensive network, but so does Surin, and who had a rather surprising illness. He really got hit by something that no one saw, came as a complete surprise, and it's been a major setback financially and physically. So he's not in super crisis mode. He's in the hospital now, but he'll be back in rehab soon. But he's mainly, long-term setbacks, which include financial setbacks. Anyway, his partner, his wife, and his community put together a GoFundMe, which often I think we forget about, or we think towards only big political issues. But they put this GoFundMe together. They ran it. They've run it for at least a month, maybe a little over a month, and it's now raised a huge amount of money. I mean, it's raised more than I could have hoped for. I think close to or over $70,000 US. So I just say that to say I think Surin would be able to raise. I think this is a route he should think of. I hope, my dear brother Surin, if you're listening to this, we can talk about any of your thoughts. But between all of the various networks that he has, if cash is one of the issues, I would imagine that GoFundMe is actually one of the faster, and people raise it for things like this. It's not just political projects. It's comrades who need some extra support. So that, as soon as you said that, Joy, I thought, oh, this GoFundMe may be a way to help Surin and his family out.
Lawrence.
Hmm. So I don't have any updates of that nature. Should we shift key at this point and talk about? So I think in terms of what's happening, if I think about the big picture, the local picture, and then kind of the very small things that I'm involved with. Um, in the big picture is obviously, need to think how to say this sensibly. The war on Gaza has provoked an international movement and a coming together of movements in a way that many other wars and crises have not. Um, and I think we don't yet know whether there are connections being made there that will last beyond that. Yeah, I'm sure Matt is much closer to the ground than me on all of this. This constant cycle that we see in some kinds of movements of mass response to crisis and then dissipation, but it does connect many, many different movements. It's felt very widely and very internationally. And that, I think, cannot be a bad thing. And is also, I think, we're seeing in a number of countries putting governments on the back foot that thought that they could proceed with their foreign policies with less attention to the street. They're having to adjust in various ways, including, of course, some extraordinarily vicious repression, because they're also using it to see how far can they extend the scope of their repression. So Joy presumably knows in Toronto, say, this Indigo 11 group, including, so activists.
I've heard of them.
Sorry?
I just heard of them. I don't know. Please say more.
Yeah. Well, a couple of comrades of mine, but all sorts of other people, spray painted with washable paint the window of this bookstore, Indigo, that funds people with no family in Israel to go and join the Israeli military. It's a very odd kind of, gung-ho pro-Israeli militarism there. And those activists have been met with sort of hate crime charges, dawn raids, all sorts of stuff. And there is then, of course, a large mobilization in solidarity. So we're seeing the current war and the broader issue of Palestine and solidarity being a real kind of testing ground for our movements and for certainly Western governments of many kinds. So that's on the big scale. On the smaller scale, Ireland had a rather disturbing far-right riot. Pretty small, but still, we don't have many riots full stop in the city centre, and disturbing to see the far-right able to mobilise even 500 people is worrying. Including a significant proportion of young people who are perhaps not very political but quite keen on a bit of anti-police violence, a bit of looting and so on. So we are not yet sure how that's working out. Because it's a shock and unusual in Ireland, will that cause elements of the state to step back from, their traditional tolerance and kind of dog whistling and so on for the far right? Others obviously saying, there's more of a constituency here paying more attention to that. and what the wider population will do, whether people will be encouraged to express racism in various ways or will feel that they want to draw back from that. So we're, I suppose, waiting to see what happens in those respects. Yeah. Do I have much to report personally? I will say I had said this previously and then skipped a couple of meetings. I'd be very happy to combine the social movements listserv with the WSM Discuss listserv. So it has a few hundred people and, give people warning and an option or whatever. I'm not sure if that is now with Madaresh or if it's with Suren. If it's with Suren, there's no time pressure. I can come back to it at any point. If it's with Madaresh, I could take it up with him now. The list.
Just that last bit first, and there's lots to comment on what you said, the whole, but I think it's with Madaresh, and I want to say, I hadn't fully taken that in, but I had also been along parallel lines thinking. The International Peace Research Association, which I am currently Secretary General of, and Marcel is a key executive member of, does not have a listserv per se. We have lots of things, but not a listserv. And we could also think about having our e-list, our email list, which is also about 600, get invited onto and essentially put onto this listserv as our international space for communication. I can't imagine, I really can't think of much negative. It's an additional service. It's not an IPRA run listserv, but it's an international listserv of some significance. Anyway, I also thought about that. So maybe we should talk about these things a little bit for a month or two, and then have Madaresh work out the logistics of doing it.
Well, shall I email you and Madaresh then, and we can talk about what that might look like and so on, or do you want to think about it among yourselves first?
Joy, what do you think?
My sense is it needs, I think it's fine for Lawrence for you to email Madaresh and Matt. I suggest you do it to Suren and me as well.
Okay.
Suren may be less active, I may be less active because of health, and I'll be traveling from next week.
We can copy you in so you're aware, yeah.
But the issue is, I think it needs discussion. Just so we know in a little more detail, I can ask the question here. The list as it is today, WSM Discuss, has narrowed a great deal from what it was. A significant chunk of it is to do with India, and a very particular skein of thinking and action within India. And then by virtue of the fact that the main person posting from India today, Shukla Sen, also posts on a socialist listserv plus one or two, and he copies those in, those people also respond. So we are caught in this situation of people, I don't know whether it's just knee-jerk reaction, but if they respond, they reply all, or whether they want to get onto this. One or two have. And it's causing, one just caveat I'd say about Madaresh, I think I don't know how much he's wagering to take on. He was wagering to take on enough to be able to help out Suren with approvals and disapprovals of what's called list moderation, but it's a very technical aspect of it, and getting rid of the spam mail, etc. I don't know whether he wants to take on more than that. So I think he needs to be asked about that as such before he's put in the spot. But the second thing is that how to deal with these issues of cross-list posting. We need more robust. There's also a list which is on basically to do with Sikhism, and that has got hold of our list address and keeps trying to post its debate on our list. Now, there's no easy way to stop that. To ask them to take it off, like it's probably on many people's lists now. It's complicated. So I think the volume of this kind of negative stuff that Maduresh is having to do in the background now is growing, and I think we need to be sensitive to this. That how much we can take on, and what we should do about it. This is the part of the practicalities of running listservs. So before we consider the possibility of bringing social movements, I mean, in principle, it's a great idea if you look only at the positive side. I'm looking at the negatives as often, that I think it's a problem for anybody to handle. And then for that matter, 600 people from the IPRA list. It would be great if it was working well. And it was great if we could think positively only, and that we try and build up a momentum. But we have these other things happening on the side, which, and the India concern is often very particular to India. It's an India focus, caste issues to do with the political issues, not at a very close, intimate way of understanding as insiders in India today. How much interest this is going to hold at a world level is a question.
So let me just say a couple of things for now in response to that. First of all, there are certainly things that happen on the listserv that make me irritated in one way or another, but I'm not as irritated as some of this very internal India discussion. Some of it I find interesting, and some of it I don't and just discard. And that's the nature of listservs in general. There's always going to be, especially listservs that are about global movements. So I think the main piece is to populate the list with more and more stuff that includes intricacies of other movements. So when Patrick, sends out large things that are South or Southern Africa based, that's a good thing. And so if we can do that with Latin America or other regions, I think that's more of a solution than an additional problem. And I guess the main thing I'll say now, just from a purely technical point of view, is yes, let's have this conversation amongst those folks you said, Joy and Lawrence, for a few rounds, and make sure we're all clear on what it is that it would mean to have these lists integrated into our list. But I say we push forward and do it. And I guess because I put IPRA into the mix, let's add Marcella also into that conversation of people. And I'm going to give you one more email address to add on, because my co-secretary general, her name is Marite, Maria Teresa Munoz, is an Argentine, quite
Maria
good.
Teresa?
Maria Teresa Munoz. We call her, she calls herself Marite, Marite, Marite for short. And, it doesn't make sense for her to join this core group or this small group at the moment. But I think any discussion about the IPRA and using WSM Discuss as sort of a listserv feature for IPRA membership, it would be appropriate. And also she'd have some ideas about, she was, before Marcella just now, for the last 5 or 6 years, she was the Secretary General of CLAIP, of the Latin American Peace Research Association. So she knows better than anyone how much there could be either in English or English and Spanish bilingually a Latin American use of a listserv like this, were we to make it available to IPRA members. So I'll send you her email address, and let's have the discussion be amongst this group and see where it goes.
Yeah.
But I think it's positive.
But I think it's positive, but I think we need to appreciate that discussion is of a different order. It's a different area than the issues with the list as it is today. And even the question of sharing of responsibilities. I mean, for instance, it's constantly having to fall back on you to have to do last minute kind of invites, notices, etc. And in other words, a very unresolved, fluid and chaotic kind of coordination that is there, and this anxiety about about Surin's health. It causes me a lot of ache. I will say that, to think about this and what he's trying to keep up with. So I mean, I think that we can't. I don't want to load all that into this discussion. That has to be handled separately. We need to find time for that too. I don't think having this other discussion, which is otherwise very welcome, loaded on top of it I don't think it's sustainable. I think the WSM discussion by itself, we need to address.
So would you prefer us to hold off on this conversation about adding in lists until things are a bit clearer with the list in its existing form, Joy?
I would say that it should first take. I mean, I'm more cautious than Matt is and less visionary, but I think that I would prefer a discussion where, if Surin can join, certainly, but Madresh definitely, and the three of us take on firstly, like what is a known group right now, to try and tease out these dimensions. And knowing that is a separate issue from the coordination of, and then the future. I mean, the future. This becomes a part of they're difficult to disentangle, but how do we handle these niggling problems, which are not so niggling? I think, at least, I don't know. I know that there are sort of 5 or 6 or 10 judgment calls that Madresh has to take every day.
It's a lot.
It's a lot of work, and it's not like she's not on the list, so I'm going to cut her off. What's the person saying? At least that's when I did it. That's what I had to go through. Is it cogent? Is it somebody? I used to even sometimes write to people separately to ask whether they'd like to be on the list. So that takes another, but I don't think he's doing any of that.
I mean, he should be able, if somebody is, say, constantly spamming the list with Sikh stuff, or if somebody is cross-posting, it should be possible simply to prevent those posts.
Well, we have to have a policy about that. Are we going to do that? And what is that? What is the technical mean by which we say it should be possible? I didn't know how to cope with it, and I tried to get advice on it. I couldn't find any easy way. But I'm technically a dodo, so it's I'm not the right. Madresh is much better at these things. But I think we need to have that discussion to lessen that load on him.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that is something I would urge that we do first, so that there's not overload. He's also at a new stage of his life, not personal health-wise, but just professionally. He's looking. His work with Global Gas Hub has come to an end. He's looking for new futures, and is likely to land something big very soon. So that's another thing.
Right. Would it be possible to kind of ask him to think sort of where the shoe pinches, like where is it, where is the weight of that work, And if
Yes, it may be
let,
interpreted very
let me
differently
suggest
to how I
something
am.
else, because we're now talking for him and about him as
Right.
opposed to with him.
yeah,
So let me suggest the following. I think Lawrence and me piggybacking Lawrence have come up with an interesting, possibly exciting, possibly you say this word visionary idea about how to expand things. And I don't want to put it aside too much or for too long. But I want to say I also hear your concerns, Joy. And I also mentioned myself the idea that Stellan and Madresh and Marcella and I would have a conversation early in the new year. And of course, all of my things about IPRA people and that is about trying to up the level of personnel in our circle so that no one of us is too burdened by things. So they're not disconnected. But can I suggest that we put on as our main agenda item for January's meeting these conversations about Madresh and what he can do and what he can't do about tightening the list coordination, and make that be the topic, the focus of January's meeting, so that we don't just put it off to some other
yeah,
group or some other
yeah,
space, that becomes the
yeah.
January meeting topic. And then may I suggest that based on that conversation, let's hope, expect, and maybe plan for that after that January conversation, Lawrence's email for this other conversation with this other group, a little side conversation, can take place and flow from there. And that's what I'd suggest as a 1-2. So we have this January thing, hopefully not every single one of, and some of it's evolutionary and will take some months to tell, but at least some of these basic questions that Joy you mentioned about what Madresh can and cannot do, and what day-to-day moderation of the current list means and what it might mean to have more. Let's have that in a month, and then shortly after that, let's see if these expansion ideas can be at least discussed in February and maybe implemented in late February and March. What say you regarding that timeline and process?
I'm fine with that. I would like only to request that it be take place after 15th of January. I'll be in an inconvenient time zone till then, till the 13th. And so that's fine with me. And I think if we can communicate this to preferably, I mean, certainly, of course, Mother Race, but also Suren, if he can possibly join us, then I think that would make a good discussion. I think I appreciate how you put it, Matt. I certainly welcome, and I'm troubled by how limited my vision is today, but I'm just very much aware almost that I've loaded all this on Suren first and now also on Madresh.
Sure.
And like I feel for them.
Yeah,
they're both people of conscience, and I feel for them.
But I also think, frankly, as with me, as with all of us, we understand the vision which started this all out, which was your vision, and the fact that now it's a bit tempered by your practicality. To me, it's all part of the dialectic. It's part of the yin yang. So it fits together, and when we come together, the vision piece and the practical piece mush into what we need, which has meant moving very slowly, and deliberately, and also moving in a way that takes into account the physical frailties of our bodies and our lives. So I think it's all right. Is my feeling. It's all right to do it this way, and let's see where it goes. I'm still hopeful cautiously hopeful that we're at a different place now than we were at the end of 2022, with some more realistic basis for sustainability and growth of the list, and not having it just die out, which is of course always an option, but not, I think, what most of us would like to see happen. All right, well, this is very practical. We're 50 minutes in. I mean, I'm also tempted to respond to other things that Lawrence said about Gaza and Palestine and the rise of the right wing and those kinds of things. But I don't know if we have more practical stuff we want to do, and I don't know how much more time we want to spend together. This was to be a short.
But can I request that we try and fix a date that's convenient, at least to the three of us, in January, and maybe in February as well, like, so we have some idea of what we're talking about.
Yeah, that makes sense. Ever the practical.
And so my 15th even starts on a Monday, not bad. Huh? It's even hit the beginning of a week.
My month is extremely free. It's much more free than usual. So the two of you should pick a date.
Lawrence?
I would wonder about perhaps a time on that Thursday or Friday, the 18th or the 19th.
Can I suggest the 19th Friday? Because we've made that a kind of day where we tend to meet, and people have less traffic conflict that day generally.
Okay, and at this time works for you both, does it? So it works for me.
It does.
So you're 11 o'clock on Friday, the 19th of January.
And Joy, the only reason I generally, our 11 o'clock. The only reason I'm going to hesitate to do February is because there's just three of us now. So
okay.
let's push to get, as you say, especially Madaresh, but also Surin and Marcella, the others if possible, especially those we've mentioned here. And then if we can really get them all on the 19th, then we can pick February, March. We can pick a few dates. But with just the three of us, we don't know enough to boldly go.
Allow me, though, to suggest a Thursday in February, which is February the 15th, because that will be the 20th anniversary of the really big protests against the Iraq War, which have the distinction of being, I think, the single biggest global social movement event in history. So there might be something to be said for even just kind of keeping that in mind, thinking about maybe having a meeting then, something like that. I don't have any concrete suggestions, but simply when you said, oh no, it's 2024, forget what I just said, blank it. I was still in 2023. How horrific is that? The 21st anniversary has no significance.
None?
You can buy beer in the US.
Listen, I'll just say, I think I like your thinking. I still want to just do January for now, but I like your thinking.
January is good. Yeah.
Not your math so much. Your math sucks, but I like your thinking. I want to say I just picked up a book at the what is it called? Peace History Society conference. He's not my favorite U.S. historian, but he's been around a long time. And this book is really interesting. It just came out. It's based on a booklet he did some years ago. David Courtwright, something called A Peaceful Superpower, Lessons from the World's Largest Anti-War Movement. And it's
Okay.
a methodological look at what you just said. You know, this thing that many people said, oh, it was a big failure. We didn't prevent the Iraq War, which is technically true, but it's a way we look at success and failure of social
Yeah.
movements that I think is very incorrect and confusing. And there's another new book by a very important but less known scholar about Vietnam, about what the U.S. and global anti-war movement did with Vietnam. That, you know, for decades, people like Kissinger and Nixon said, "Oh no, no, we're paying no attention to it," and they paid huge attention to it in ways that you know have now been uncovered in documents from Vietnam as well as from the U.S. that are now recently disclosed. So, I think you know another U.S. activist, Dave Dellinger, used to use the phrase "more power than we know," and I think it's really
Yeah.
true. And so, some of these recent research books are I think worth looking at and worth looking at in that way you said. It may even be something we want to do a webinar on or a encuentro on or something, but it does occur to me that you're thinking
Well,
in
it
that
was striking me,
direction.
the same was striking me earlier when Lawrence, you were talking about the present moment, like what is happening. And I, in my kind of perch far away, I could sense this also, that there's something happening there. But the issue is obviously how that could be translated something into some degree of power.
Yes.
And a sense also where people in our different movements feel this sense that there's some, you know, more than just a visceral sense. There's also a tactical, strategic kind of mutuality in what's going on and this understanding. And why is it that those who are why is it that so many people are so afraid of this? Why is it that so many are collapsing an anti-Israel, anti-settler state position with an anti-militarist with pro-Hamas in this easy kind of way, that it's lumped together as being the resistance to that's rising, and in a sense, you see it written in articles, one or two I've been reading about the strategic blind end that's strategic mistakes that have been made, and that Israel has no way out now. It's actually written in not its death warrant, but a long-term illness or disease warrant of increasing resistance and resistance and disgust with its approach, and it's surrounded by that. It's an island within a region that is now intensely against it. What are the implications of this?
So
I don't have I don't have answers to this, but I'm wondering how. I mean, in another time, I would have thought it would be great if we could make this a subject of discussion on the list.
I don't want to. I don't want to so quickly. I don't want to so quickly abandon the idea that it can be. And again, whether it's on the list, you know, that's why for me the list and movements of movements mushed together in ways I'm still a little mushy about. So I don't know whether this is, as I say, a webinar that we do as movements of movements or an encuentro that we have. or something we try to do in writing on the list. It almost doesn't matter to me, or it's something I want to continue talking with you all about, and let's put it also as part of our future conversations. But to me, these are very prescient questions. I'll take a minute now to come back to Lawrence, what you said at the beginning of this round. I think you're super correct about the movements around, or the movements that have developed post October 7th have had a different nature to them than I think many of us expected. For me, following pretty carefully the anti-Zionist Palestinian rights movements pre-October 7th, saw this increasing Israeli anti-Netanyahu, anti-militarist, I would say Zionist critical movement. And when October 7th happened, because of what I know about Hamas, because of what I know about militarism, because of what happened that weekend or what might have happened that weekend, I felt pretty certain and pretty discouraged that this was going to set back the Palestinian cause by decades. And I was wrong. Happily wrong. Just the way we were wrong when at some point in the early to mid 1980s, it seemed certain that apartheid, at least the most politically, legally, manifest nature of South African apartheid would not end in our lifetime, or would end only in a massive bloodbath. Both of those predictions happily and completely untrue. And so I think it's been really noteworthy and important that the movement for a free Palestine, including the movement for a ceasefire, including the movement for an end to settler colonialism and Israeli apartheid, including an Israeli and international anti-Zionist movement, has grown in the last months in ways I could only have dreamed of. And I have to say, here in New York, and as a person, born of Jewish descent, Joy, your questions are valid and significant. I think there's long been a tendency, especially vibrant in the last some years in the U.S. and elsewhere, where there's something a group of friends have a website about called Three-Way Fight. Three-Way Fight is the website, where there's some very good pieces about this idea that the right, in attempts to capture the left, obscures the fact that the enemy of my enemy is not necessarily my friend. That's the three-way fight, this sort of vision that, well, if you're against this, then you can be against this, then you can be in favor of this, and all kinds of twists and turns, so that right-wing ideas or ideologies or peoples or organizations seem more attractive than they are. So yes, I'm used to the let's just forget about everything regarding war crimes, regarding Islamic fundamentalism, regarding the treatment of civilians, and let's say rah rah to Hamas for doing what they did. No, I don't think that's, I think that's a relatively minor piece of what we're seeing. I think what we're seeing is a long-standing understanding that Palestine, is and has been an occupied territory, not the only one in the world, but one of several, but one whose time has come. And I think we need to look at movement building on the scale of what happened in the 80s around South Africa, with similar tactics of boycott, divestment, and sanctions that might, along with other factors, turn the tide. And I will say, I just had this conversation last night. People look at my social media. I was at this amazing rally led by scores of rabbis unbelievable. They weren't like old-fashioned rabbis. They were new, young, you know, but calling for a ceasefire with a menorah, a big menorah with the word ceasefire on it, right next to a big Palestinian flag. It was glorious and unthinkable in my city 5 years ago. And I think what we really have, in addition to something that's more of a movement than we've seen in past, we've seen massive demonstrations in the US in the past years, but they didn't feel like a movement. This is a movement. There are leaders, there are strategies, there are organizations being built, and coalitions within those organizations. And in addition to the general movement, which tends to be, in some ways, not enough for my taste, but in some ways, Palestinian-led, and in need of more Palestinian leadership, including, when necessary, Palestinian diaspora, it indicates a split within the empire that's new. And the empire we're talking about here is the Israeli Zionist empire. It's not a split where a bunch of Jews are saying, we'll just, go to Europe instead, or commit suicide and jump into the sea. It's a Jewish movement that says our history is 6,000 years old, and Zionism is 100 years old, or successful contemporary Zionism. And Zionism has no place in representing Judaism and in oppressing Palestinian people in a way that we were oppressed. We say never again, and now we're committing genocide against another people. And so I see a split within the Zionist project, within the Jewish community, especially the entire massive, I would say easily majority of the younger generation of Jews, that will essentially make Israel in its current form since 1948 impossible. So the shifts won't be necessarily a shift to Hamas or a shift to Hezbollah or Islamic Jihad, but it could be a shift, in fact, to a democratic, secular Palestine, which will, again, like the end of political apartheid, not solve all the problems of South Africa, but will at least move this phase of struggle to another phase. And I'm incredibly excited about it. It's one of the most positive things, I think, ultimately, in terms of social movement building that I've seen in some years. So that's my take.
Thank you for that. That's very
Thank you. Yes, indeed.
hopeful to hear.
It's cautious, but it's different. I was in the middle of a lot of Black Lives Matter, not to put down any movement, and it never felt like a movement. I always said, this is something else. It's great. It's great to see these massive, huge demonstrations, but it's not. And it wasn't my lack of connection to the Black movement. All of my key strategic comrades in the Black movement were saying the same thing. This is not exactly, it's great to see large numbers, but it's not exactly that. This is something else in terms of campaign strategy, in terms of, I'm cautious, but, and of course it's in the context of daily horror, absolute horror, but there's a chance here of something that is more power than we know. I hope and pray.
Yeah, I think this is the kind of space where something like the list, and indeed, peace studies researchers and so on, can offer something, because the movement does very easily get caught up with, the problems of campism that you've just identified. Sort of, there have to be one good side and one bad side. And if Israel and the US are the bad side, then Hamas has to be the good side, which is clearly, to me is also a very Western notion, because what's clear from any post-colonial perspective is that actually simply opposing empire does not necessarily mean you're going to be good people to run a newly independent state. In fact, more often the opposite. That, you know, most of the world lives with the detritus of things that were seen as liberation movements. I think it does pose a different challenge to, and this is the kind of thing perhaps that on a list like this we can tease out more, is the ANC had legitimacy. The ANC had some very, very dark shadow sides, but it had broad legitimacy within South Africa and externally. Much of the rhetoric, certainly of what I see, remains within a kind of implicit Palestinian nationalism. Implicitly, there should be an independent Palestinian state, which then leaves you with Hamas, Fatah, and all sorts of other actors who are either undesirable or incapable of filling that role. There's a sort of question mark that much of that rhetoric points towards.
So they're in contention for power, though.
There is a contention for power, but particularly when you say should be led by Palestinians.
Yeah.
This is, of course, true in the abstract.
And it's a very powerful push than people, and and deep pockets of funding and support. So it's a tough one.
Yeah, I mean, horrible funding issues aside, and U.S. influence and Saudi influence and Iranian influence and etc.
Turkish influence, whatever else. Yeah.
The fact is, there is something of a Palestinian left, and it understands that Fatah and Hamas and Hezbollah are not it.
Sure.
And so what happens in Ramallah is very interesting to watch, in my opinion. Just parenthetically, I'm closest to, I think many of my comrades and I are closest to the coalition of groups that represent all of the political prisoners, not just Fatah or Hamas, those and the others, PFLP, PFLDP, the whole of the history of political prisoners, and that group, Ad-Damir is the group, has put out some very interesting, both documentary of what's happening. They've sort of documented this has happened. When they don't do it daily, it's not like they're a journalistic source, but when there's a particular outrage that they think it's worth noting, maybe once a week they'll put something out. But they also put out a strategic analysis of the moment, which I think is amongst the best things I've seen. I can send the link, but I think I put it on the list. But anyway, I think the conversations are super interesting because there is an understanding of, well, just the nationalist project itself. It's not exactly like these guys are Zapatistas, but it's also 2023, and people do read a movement. The Palestinians that have been in the Occupied People's Forum that I've been part of, we've had these conversations. So the idea that a Palestinian state is the answer, the two-state solution, of Israel and a Palestinian state is widely rejected now. And a two-state solution would have more space probably for Fatah or Hamas or Hezbollah to compete for leadership. Whereas a single secular state is very interesting and confusing. Jews will be running for office as well. Hopefully, anti-Zionist Jews winning more votes than ones who want to return to the good old days. But like South Africa post 1984, and especially, post 1994, and especially more recently, it's going to be a messy, confusing situation.
Sure.
But it will not be a Zionist situation at the center of it. So I don't know. I think these are all valid and
Yeah.
important questions about who the Palestinian leadership will be. Ultimately, not questions for us to answer, but
Yeah.
I
But
don't think it's
questions that a global movement
yeah,
can usefully talk about in smaller spaces and less well on social media or when things are articulated as kind of in the face of, American or Canadian or whatever state saying you're all anti-Semitic, this kind of carry
exactly,
on.
exactly.
Mm.
Harder to say when it's a group of rabbis at a first night of Hanukkah event saying end it
Yeah,
now and whatever. It's just
yeah,
yeah, it's a
yeah.
different space. Yeah, yeah.
That's
Anyway,
fantastic.
I suspect we should probably end for now. Um, I almost want to say a little joke because I like I don't know if any of you follow the comedy website The Onion. But here in the United States, we did have another cause for celebration. It's a bitter one. A certain guy named Kissinger, who won a big prize for peace
Hmm.
years
Hmm.
ago, finally passed away after
Hmm.
many decades. And the Onion headline, not mentioning the gentleman's name as I have not either, uh, really put, I think, the best descriptor of this particular gentleman I've seen. The Onion said, "Iconic napalm rights advocate, dead at 100." So anyway, I just thought that was extraordinary, and let there never be another such figure in our next century. So that's just my hope for the end of the year, amongst others.
Thank you, Matt. Mm.
Wow, that's been very moving to listen to you guys. I should be going. I'm actually meant to be resting more than I am, and just getting stirred up by these conversations. But it is stirring and hopeful. And so let's, Matt, can I ask you whether you would get a note out to everybody about and giving some kind of indication of what the agenda is?
Yeah.
Will do.
Now, is that simply to the 4 or 5 of us, or also Patrick?
Whatever, 6 or 7. No, I mean, I think we should do
Yeah.
it to Marcella and Patrick and Madhuresh and Stur and then Wendy and the same 6 or 7 or 8 I've been sending to.
Yeah.
Then Michal and Marcella would be there too, right?
Exactly. Yep.
So I think it gets very cumbersome to keep chopping and changing the list, number of people. So I think everyone should be there.
Yeah.
But giving that summary, and I suppose maybe a link to the recording.
Exactly. I'll try to do that today. I'll
think
make the
that
link to the recording and the link to the January 19th today. And then we can see as we get into the new year whether a week or so before, 10 days before, Madhuresh or Surin can send out a reminder, or I have to. A little note.
Maybe you could speak with Madhuresh about this, whether he'd be willing to inch forward. I'm very reluctant, given my long history with him.
No. It's one of the things I want to talk to him about. And I will say this: I'm overloaded with things I need to catch up on and do. But it is true that in the next 6 weeks, in the next 8 weeks, I'm not traveling. I'm here in Brooklyn. This is my spot. So,
Wow.
so I'm excited about it. I'm terribly looking forward to being still for a bit and to also catching up on things. But yeah, this conversation with Madhuresh and Stellan and Marcel and I might be really good if we can have it take place before the 19th and get some of these other things halfway worked out before the 19th. At least he'll be thinking about them in advance.
Can I just ask for one additional thing that at least the three of us think about this? This particular group is one of its things, it has some marvelous people on it, is ill health. And which has taken, hit people, Surin in particular, but also you, Matt, at one point. Suddenly it happened during this year, and myself, and Lawrence, you've had some of it, and by sudden assault, and has really had us reeling. And I think we should realize that this is the norm now. And how do we cope with that? Not take it as flailing around, like, what do we do? Matt, will you do this? Will you do that? Like filling in somehow. We have to be looking also at this fragility and the delicacy of life, particularly as we get on, I think age-wise, if not us, then our partners. I just somewhere want to park this thing. I think it's always kind of there on the side as a missing participant in the discussion, but it's there. And I think we need to be looking at it more frontally, because one or more of us is not going to be here, be able to take part that much within a year easily. And I think that we need to look ahead to that, not to welcome it, but just to look ahead to what that means. Business is not as usual anymore.
Yeah.
I'm just throwing that on. I mean, I know it's being recorded, but I want it to be listened to by others also.
No, I think I think it's true. And I think as we close for today and wish one another and our comrades who will hopefully listen to this as well, a happy and healthy holiday season, it's more than just a rhetorical tagline.
Yeah, no, it is.
Yeah, having a healthy year takes some greater work and less assumption than we might have in decades past.
Okay. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Lawrence, for being here.
Thank you both.
Love you guys. Take care, and
take care of yourself.
Take care of yourselves, indeed.
See you in the new year.
Yourselves.
Yeah.
Yes.
Inshallah, see you then.
January 19th. Ciao.
Bye.
Bye.